WorldAware's annual global forecast report looks at various regions around the world, as well as categories including health, environment, terrorism, kidnapping, and transportation. The 2019 report is compiled by expert intelligence analysts across the globe. I'm Lee Ridley, Senior Intelligence Manager for the Asia Pacific region, and will be sharing highlights from that section of the 2019 global forecast. In 2019, elections are slated to take place in key Asian countries such as Indonesia, the Philippines, Thailand, India, Japan, and Australia. While the ruling parties appear likely to retain power in most cases, opposition parties could gain ground in some legislatures, potentially undermining the agendas of the parties in power. The potential for substantial unrest, however, remains low. The status quo is highly likely to continue, despite demonstrations or bouts of political and religious violence during the election cycles in Indonesia, the Philippines, Thailand, and India. Terrorism is also a concern in the Philippines and Indonesia, as militants may seek to disrupt a plebiscite on the Bangsamoro Organic Law, BOL, and presidential polls, respectively. I'll go into detail about that shortly. Rallies are set to take place more frequently in Indonesia in the coming months as the country prepares to hold its presidential and legislative elections on April 17th. The October incident involving the burning of a flag with Arab wording that some claim depicted the Islamic Creed prompted rallies by conservative Muslim groups demanding the government act against the perpetrators. However, the threat of civil unrest remains moderate and is unlikely to have a significant impact on the country's stability. The election could have more impact on the operating environment with the success of Prabowo in Indonesia's presidential election and could lead to a return of a more nationalist economic agenda. The threat of additional protests may continue into the post-election period, particularly if victory is achieved by a narrow margin. Terrorism could also be a concern, given the foiled terror plots targeting the June regional elections. If Jokowi secures a second term, it's possible he will continue a shift towards populism, focusing more on social welfare than major infrastructure projects. If Prabowo becomes president, Indonesia will likely move towards greater economic nationalism, including cutting back on Chinese investments and greater intervention in state-owned enterprises. Politically motivated violence and militant attacks will likely escalate in the run-up to the Philippines midterm elections, slated for May 13th. Pre-election lawlessness has traditionally been a serious problem in the Philippines, with political candidates and party activists often targeted in shootings or grenade attacks. An upsurge in militant activity, including those by the Communist New People's Army and Islamist groups, are possible, especially in Mindanao. The NPA has a history of extorting protection money from candidates, and dozens of candidates have previously enlisted the support of the group in various provinces throughout the country. Election-related security disturbances are also likely after voting concludes. The overall security situation should remain largely stable, but allegations of fraud or other electoral irregularities could generate protest. Civil unrest could have tangential effects on business interests in urban areas. Political instability and the threat of civil unrest are likely to persist even if Thailand holds its much-awaited general election in 2019, which will tentatively occur between February and May. The military government lifted the ban on political activity on December 11th, allowing space for political parties to campaign for the election. Despite the relaxation on political restrictions, the military's control of political activity is likely to continue, as we saw with the recent charges against the new Future Forward Party. Continued crackdowns on the opposition could prompt pro-democracy protests by activists demanding free and fair elections. Demonstrations are also possible if the military postpones the election from February 24th, as is widely expected, due to the coronation ceremonies for the king. Politically motivated attacks, including bombings outside the Deep South, in the run-up to and during the elections, cannot be ruled out. Political wrangling and instability are likely to continue regardless of the election results. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi will be seeking a second term in office in the next general election due in April to May 2019. Modi's BJP will probably win the upcoming election, albeit by a slimmer margin than the 2014 poll, when it won 282 of the 543 directly contested seats in the lower house of the national parliament. Such an outcome could affect the government's ability to pass legislation in parliament and effectively pursue its agenda during its second term. The Modi government has faced growing criticism for its failure to create adequate jobs for India's large labor force and to address concerns of rural communities over falling agricultural prices and wages. Various disaffected groups have staged numerous violent and disruptive anti-government protests in recent years. Such actions could escalate in the run-up to the vote. Religious tensions could also further escalate amid the ongoing push by the BJP. While fears of frequent major attacks in urban centers haven't followed the 2014 election, Islamist militant groups opposed to the BJP's divisive Hindu-centered politics could attempt to stage mass casualty strikes in the run-up to the vote to discredit his government. Japan will hold local and House of Councilor elections in April and July 2019, respectively. Neither election appears likely to alter the political status quo in the country. The polls come at a time of wavering support for ruling Liberal Democratic Party leader and Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. The Prime Minister has made amending the Constitution to define the country's self-defense force as a military a priority for his remaining years in power. This election poses higher stakes. Political action in the lead up to the vote is likely to be particularly intense, especially from opponents of revising the Constitution. While the largest demonstrations over the issue are likely in Tokyo, protests remain possible across the country. Elections for the Australian House of Representatives will be held on or before November 2nd. The 2019 election will be closely contested between the Liberal National Coalition and the Labour Party, with recent polls indicating a near statistical tie in voter preferences at the national level. The election and related campaigns are unlikely to be majorly disruptive. Rallies and protests related to the elections and contentious issues such as immigration and workers' rights could prompt localized ground transport disruptions, especially in major cities. Though elections will take place in several countries throughout Asia in 2019, the potential for substantial unrest remains low. Political rallies and other campaign activities could lead to localized disruptions in countries such as Japan and Australia. Meanwhile, larger, more disruptive demonstrations and political violence could occur in India, Indonesia, Philippines, and to a lesser degree, Thailand. While the election period and results are unlikely to significantly impact business operations in the affected countries, opposition gains could limit the ability of ruling parties to pursue their agenda with various degrees of business impact. An increase of support for President Rodrigo Duterte's party in the Philippines could see him fulfill his pledge to move the country towards federalism, while the success of Prabowo in Indonesia's presidential election could lead to a return of a more nationalist economic agenda. Thank you for learning more about the Asia region and the 2019 Global Forecast. Tweet your questions using the hashtag Global Forecast 2019, and I will respond to your questions. For more information about the 2019 Global Forecast Report and to download an executive summary and security assessment rating maps, visit the WorldAware website.